Hello, I'm Ron Wilson. In this month's news, ASFA has concluded that while Australia's superannuation system is not broken, it can be improved, with a case to extend the compulsory superannuation regime to focus more on the self-employed. In international news, the Asian Development Bank has cut its 2015 growth forecast for Asia, and in Europe, the ratio of government debt to GDP has risen further. In other news, ASIC has released 2 information sheets in an attempt to improve the quality of advice provided by advisors on SMSFs. Trevor Trahan has the details.
There's no urgency to make changes to the superannuation and retirement income system as it's sustainable, according to ASFA. ASFA said it supports the continuous review of a superannuation system which has been adjusted continuously over the last few years. However, changes must be discussed and implemented with appropriate notice. ASFA identified a policy case to extend the compulsory superannuation regime to include some or all of the self-employed. Nearly 10% of the current labour workforce are self-employed, and it's likely that the majority of these workers will find themselves without business assets sufficient to support a comfortable standard of living in retirement. The Financial Ombudsman Service, or FOS, has introduced a new process for resolving disputes with fewer touch points and more active engagement between FOS staff and both parties to a dispute. The new dispute process involves a new process to fast-track decisions for simpler and low-value disputes, a new registration and referral process to give financial service providers, or FSPs, a final opportunity to resolve their dispute directly with their customers before the FOS investigation begins, provision of specialist expertise earlier in the dispute process, and the reduction of multiple touch points and process stages, a more efficient financial difficulty dispute process, and a new format for decisions that more effectively communicates the outcomes of disputes to applicants and FSPs. The RBA again decided to maintain the cash rate at 2% at its August board meeting. The RBA's Governor, Glenn Stevens, commented the global economy is expanding at a moderate pace, but some key commodity prices are much lower than a year ago. Overall consumer credit demand grew 10.7% year-on-year in the June 2015 quarter, according to the VIDA Quarterly Consumer Credit Demand Index, which measures the volume of credit card and personal loan applications. Compared with the June quarter 2014, demand for credit cards was up 15% for the June 2015 quarter, as well as a 6.4% rise in demand for personal loans. The Asian Development Bank, or ADB, has cut its 2015 growth forecast for Asia amid slower than expected economic activity in the US and China. Growth forecast for developing Asia has come down to 6.1% from 6.3% for 2015, while the ADB said ongoing softness in the major industrialized economies such as the US, Japan and the euro area will see a slowdown in East Asia as a whole, with growth now at 6.2% in 2015, down from 6.5% forecast previously. The Conference Board Consumer Confidence Index in the US declined in July, leaving it standing at 90.0 compared with 99.8 in June. The Present Situation Index decreased moderately from 110.3 in June to 107.4 in July, while the Expectations Index declined sharply to 79.9 from 92.8 in June. At the end of Q1 2015, the government debt to GDP ratio in the euro area stood at 92.9%, compared with 92% at the end of the fourth quarter of 2014, according to Eurostat, the statistical office of the EU. With regard to the EU's 28 member states, or EU 28, the government debt to GDP ratio increased from 86.9% to 88.2% compared with the fourth quarter of 2014, while debt securities accounted for 79.1% of euro area and for 80.8% of EU 28 general government debt. The debt situation in Greece and the sharp stock market fall in China will have minimal impact on Australia, according to Australia's Treasurer Joe Hockey. Greece has recently agreed to a third bailout from its creditors in 5 years, while in China, after climbing 150% in the year to June 2015, the stock market fell 30% over 6 weeks to the end of July. Hockey explained that he had been reassured that the Eurozone's leaders have matters in hand over the negotiations for Greece's latest bailout. In terms of the drop in the Chinese stock market, Hockey said it's a very volatile market, but it's still 90% higher than it was 12 months ago. In an attempt to improve the quality of advice provided by advisors on SMSFs, ASIC has released 2 information sheets. Advice on self-managed super funds, disclosure of risks, Info 205, and Advice on Self-Managed Super Funds, Disclosure of Costs, Info 206. The regulator claimed the information sheets are intended to assist advisors comply with their conduct and disclosure obligations under the Corporations Act by outlining what ASIC looks at when undertaking surveillance in this area. APRA announced an increase in the amount of capital required for Australian residential mortgage exposures by authorised deposit-taking institutions, or ADIs, accredited to use the Internal Ratings-Based, or IRB, approach to credit risk. This change, which will take effect from 1 July 2016, will mean that, for ADIs accredited to use the IRB approach, the average risk weight on Australian residential mortgage exposures will increase from approximately 16% to at least 25%.